record this morning's session. So you just have to allow access for that. I will send you, as a follow-up from today's session, I'll send you across the slides that we cover today and the recording of the session in case you want to go back over it, or if you want to share it with any of your teams or anyone else in your professional network you think they might get some value from it. Please feel free to do that after today's session. So we'll talk about questioning and we'll talk about listening this morning. And the way that we structure these workshops, I try and make them kind of three kind of quarters. God, you can tell it's Friday, can't you? Right, 3/3. The first third of today's session, about 15 minutes, I'll just talk about some principles. I'll kind of lay out some foundations that hopefully just get you thinking differently about perhaps the approach you're taking today. And then the second third, I'll open up the group to breakout rooms and I'll give you the opportunity to talk with each other. And those of you who've joined us before will know the format. And that will give you a chance to talk about what you're doing today, what you think about the principles we've discussed and how they might change and improve what you're doing today. And then the final third is us regrouping and just taking some feedback from your discussions, because you'll all be sharing different kind of principles, different actions that you want to take. And there's learning in all three of those different segments of the session today. So hopefully learning some principles, being able to discuss it with your peers so that you start to process it. So this is what I think I need to change or improve. And then finally feeding back and hearing everyone's feedback, because you'll get learning from that as well. And then we'll close the session, and we will close before 10 o'clock UK time. So we'll close by about 5:02 to give you 5 minutes before your 10 o'clock meeting. How does that sound to everybody? Okay.
Yep, cool.
Brilliant. Thank you. Excellent. Well, again, huge thanks for joining me this morning. These sessions only work because you show up. Otherwise, I'd be standing here on my own, which has happened. It has happened, I promise you. But this morning, we'll look at how we use questions to create solutions in our business. Because very often as leaders, I've found this in many businesses I've led, you tend to find yourself in a position where you're the go-to person for all the answers. And if you, early in your career, that's probably a good thing. As you go through your career, it becomes a bit of a burden and it can be tiring, it can weigh you down. So we have to start to switch the perspective and switch responsibility from ourselves to our teams. And we do that through questioning and listening. And we'll look at three things this morning. We'll look at how to really listen to our teams. And that sounds obvious, but I'll talk about why that's not quite so difficult this morning. We'll look at how we ask better quality questions, and then we'll look at questions as a tool for change. And then I'll hand over to you to discuss that with your groups. Okay, so I love this quote about dependency. Our dependency can make slaves out of us, especially if it's a dependency of self-esteem. Sometimes, and I've experienced this with clients I work with, sometimes we get self-esteem from having answers for our teams, right? But if we need that encouragement, praise, or pats on the back from everybody that we work with, then we make everybody either our judge or we become a slave to them. We have to be really careful that we recognize when there's an opportunity for us to not give people answers and question instead. It's a really interesting skill to start to develop as leaders in our businesses. So for us, many of you will have seen this before. This is the kind of framework that I use for client work, for our leadership development program, our coaching leaders program, which is also the same model from the book that I wrote called Coaching Leaders. So do feel free to look that up. But we're really kind of in the coach for change stage of the process today. So we won't look at coaching specifically, but the precursors to coaching are questioning and listening. And listening is really interesting. Let's start with listening, because I've had this experience in my career where I've learned coaching skills. I've started to coach people, and then I find myself distracted or tuned out. And then I think I've just asked a really good question. I've got no idea what they said. And then I've got to try and pick up the pace and pretend that I'm continuing the conversation. I don't know if that's happened to you. I've also had it the other way around, where someone's asked me a question, I've answered, and I can tell that I haven't listened. And then I have to either repeat myself, or it just feels really like it just disconnects you. It's a bit of a withdrawal from the emotional bank account, I always find. So listening is really important, and it's a skill we have to start to cultivate. And the reason listening is difficult, so these are stats from the International Listening Association. The reason it's so difficult is because we speak at between 125 and 175 words per minute. Okay, so that's the average speaking rate. But we're able to listen at closer to 450. So you can notice this immediate disconnect. Our capability of listening is so much greater than someone's capability for speaking that sometimes we get bored, or we just think, why won't they hurry up and get to the point? And if you ever find yourself thinking that, you're not alone. It's a very common problem. And then thirdly, we think at between 2,000 and 3,000 words a minute. So if you could put all the images, all the senses that we have into words, it would be between 2,000 and 3,000 words. It's the brain processing speed. So you can see that actually sometimes it's quite difficult. And if we don't intentionally tune into someone, it's very easy for us to overlook listening. And what that means for most people is that we absorb between 17 and 25% of what we hear. Now, we're talking about ourselves as leaders. That's true for our teams as well. It's really important that we recognize this gap and potential flaw in ours and our team's abilities to listen. And fun fact for you, the number one reason marriages fail is because one or the other partner doesn't feel listened to. So this doesn't just affect us professionally, this affects us personally as well. And so what we need to start to think about is how do we tune in? How do we become more active listeners? And there's this, I love this kind of analogy for listen, right? So the L is look interested and get yourself interested. Sometimes that might be something you have to do intentionally. The I is involve yourself by responding when someone's talking, because that keeps you engaged in the listening process. The S is to stay on target. Don't be distracted. If things are happening in the background, stay on target with the person you're listening to, really tune in. And it's interesting, I do a lot of coaching, one-to-one coaching. And when I do that, I tend to do it in like a hotel. So we'll do it in a hotel, restaurant, or somewhere like that. And there's always something going on in the background. And I will often sense my clients being distracted by that. But I've been doing this now for about 6 years. I've now learned to just completely tune out of anything in the background, just tune in on the person. But it's taken me a long time to practice, to stay on target in listening. And then the T is test your understanding. And the test your understanding is, paraphrase, ask checking questions. Just double check that throughout the conversation, you are understanding what's being said, because sometimes you might be slightly off and someone can then clarify, and it helps them to get that sense that you're really understanding what they're saying. The E is evaluate the message. Just make sure that what is being told, what you are being told is true, and that you're kind of gathering the right information. And then the N is sometimes people will tell us things that might spark emotion in us. So often we might have to neutralize our own feelings when we're being told something, perhaps by our teams, that we don't want to hear. If they're not going to make certain achievements, targets, or goals, sometimes we might find ourselves jumping in and saying, well, I can't accept that, or what are you going to do instead? And actually sometimes just listening to people right the way through can be really useful. So active listening is an important skill for us to develop. And when we're doing it, some of this is common sense, some of it is useful to remind ourselves of, but we repeat key words that our team members are using. And that repetition and like paraphrasing, mini summaries, really acknowledges that we're listening and reinforces that we've understood what they're saying and what they need, if it's a case of us understanding if they need something from us. And then, of course, at the end, and I'm a big fan of summaries, just at the end to summarize the discussion. So what you're saying is, and just 3 or 4 bullet points about what they've said. The thing about doing that is it helps sometimes people process, especially if you've had a deep conversation about lots of things. It helps everyone to come back to simple principles that you then want to cover. And of course, it forces, if you're going to summarize every time you have a conversation, you have to listen. It forces you to be more attentive. That's what I've found. It actually becomes self-fulfilling. The more you summarize, the more you have to tune in, because you have to listen to be able to do the summary at the end anyway. And of course, that improves our ability to influence people positively, so that they get the results they're looking for. They increase responsibility, and as leaders, it makes our jobs easier. So listening is a real key to us being able to do this. So I'll invite you to think about what you need to do to improve your listening skills, but I'd also like to just quickly touch on questioning. And then once I've done questioning, then we'll open up some breakout rooms, and I'll invite you to think about, okay, what might you need to focus on in terms of improving your listening, and to start to think about the questions that you ask. So listening is really important, as we said. Questioning is also important. One of the things that I noticed I spent a lot of time as a sales manager and a business manager, so I did a lot of coaching with my teams. One of the things I noticed became a default with people that I work with, and I hadn't realized until I was in a leadership position, was that a lot of people default to closed questions. So they'll automatically say, you know, are you okay? Have you done this? Can you do this? Would you do this? Should we be doing this? And it's closed, closed, closed. What that means is you end up in conversations where people will give you answers that are yes or no. And sometimes I've found this myself as a leader, thought it can be frustrating. You think, why don't I get more information out of people? Why aren't they just opening up a bit more? And it wasn't until I recognized that actually it's the type of questions we ask on default that tend to shut people down or give us yes, no answers. So what we need to kind of start to consider is that there are three types of questions, and closed questions are probably the least effective, unless we just want someone to say yes or no, right? But we tend to default to them. And after today's session, I'd love for you to start to look at the people that you work with, your teams, start to notice the questions they ask, because you'll start to notice that people default to yes or no questions. I do client work all the time. I've been out 3 days this week with clients, and it's something we focused in on. And over the course of our program together with my client team, they started to notice the number of closed questions that were just asked automatically in their business. And so they're making now a conscious effort to open things up, to try and get more information, more openness from their teams, especially when it comes to kind of coaching conversations and helping people to think about change and what they're going to do differently. But there are three types of questions. I won't talk about closed questions because they come far too naturally to us, but we will talk about the other two types of questions. So open questions and probing questions. Okay, so open questions are obviously questions that get people talking. Probing questions are questions we ask when we perhaps have got some information, but we want to go a little bit deeper. We think we've got a kind of surface-based answer. We want to go a little deeper and get, you know, real clarity from people. So the way we do that, simplest way, open questions, the easiest way to remember it is that they begin with what or how. And if we ask people what or how questions, no matter what situation we're in, if we can start to default and ask, you know, what is the situation, or what have you been working on, or how are things going, or how would you like to change what you're doing today? We start to use those what or how question structures. It completely changes the dynamic of our conversations, and it gets our teams to open up. And through that opening up, you tend to find that relationships improve as well. So they're really powerful. And one of the things that comes up often for me is people say, well, what about asking why? Isn't why an open question? And why is an open question? Absolutely. The challenge with a why question is that why tends to create defensiveness in people. So if I say to somebody, you know, why have you done that? They'll tend to then feel like they have to justify themselves. And it's hardwired from childhood when we get asked why a lot in a negative context. And so when we're asking questions that begin with why, we just have to be really selective about what we ask. And I always think about two situations where I ask why questions. One is, I call it in reverse. So instead of why did you do that, it might be, why is it important that you make a change? So it's getting people to reverse out of their situation, not stay stuck in it. And then the second is about unlocking motivation and passion. So I might say to somebody, why is this so important to you? And that's a really powerful question then if I use it in the right context. But you can see that using it in the wrong context can really start to undermine the relationship and actually create defensiveness. And I've been in situations in the past with team members before I learned these principles, and I would ask a question like, you know, why did you do that? And then I'd be thinking, and I'd get into these conversations, I'd be thinking, where's this? How have I got to this point where the person in front of me is so defensive? And actually, it's all to do with the questions that I asked and the way I asked them without realizing, you know, it's completely unconscious. So as leaders, sometimes we have to go back and cover some of these fundamentals so that we can really start to get the best from our teams, the best from those relationships and the coaching conversations that we have with them. And then, so that's open questions. So then finally, probing questions. So we might ask a question of your team, you know, why is that so important of you? Or, you know, what have you been working on? And they give you an answer that's perhaps not as in depth or not giving you the information you want. So we then probe. So we might just say, it's really simple, just say, you know, what else have you been working on, or what else did you find when you were doing that? Or you might simply say, yeah, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Just tell me a bit more about it. And as simple as that sounds, these are really often overlooked. We ask a question, get an answer, kind of go, that's not what I wanted, and move on. When actually we just need to probe a little more, go below the surface, and help our teams to be able to get that kind of clarity over their own thinking as well. And that's the thing about questions. It helps our teams and people we're working with to get that clarity for themselves as well as clarity for us when we're having these conversations. So that's the content part of this morning's session. So questioning and listening, but in the other way around, in the other order, right? Listening first, because what we don't want to do is undermine the great work we do by asking good questions. We have to learn to tune into people first, and sometimes that takes a little intention from ourselves, and we might need to think about some of the habits we've currently formed and how we start to change those habits to become better listeners and ask better questions. So I'm just going to pause my screen sharing. Was I sharing my screen, by the way?
Nope.
Ah,
No,
oh, goodness me, I'm sorry. Did you still follow it or not?
we
Yeah.
did. For those who were taking notes.
Ah, God, I've got some brilliant slides here. You should see them. They're amazing. I genuinely, I'm sorry about that. I thought I was sharing my screen. Cassandra, you've got your hand up.
Yes, please. I think thank you. The bit that I missed was I think you have an acronym in there, and then you.
Yeah, I tell you what, I did have an acronym. Yeah, hold on. Let me share. Oh, dear, that is like a schoolboy error. Sorry about that. Let me go back. Let me go back a second. I won't go through it all again. There's the list. I will send you these slides after today's session. There's our listen acronym.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was when I was talking through listen. I'm sorry about that. I should have, you know, as I went to stop sharing, it said new share, and I thought, does that mean I haven't been sharing? Sorry about that. Here are my stats on listening. Look, so I was talking about that, but there was no visuals. I think that was it. That was the listening. That was my acronym. This was the active listening. I'll send you these afterwards so you'll have them. This was the questioning structure, open, closed, probing. This is the open questions and the kind of why. I put why in red so that it's a kind of flag. We only use why in reverse or to unlock someone's motivation and passion. That's the idea. And then probing questions. I'm quite proud of this probing question slides. What else? Tell me more. Okay. So these are the kind of principles for really starting to fine tune listening and questioning skills. And I learned years ago, you know, as obvious as this sounds, I remember someone saying to me, you do know, Justin, you can ask any question you want of somebody. You can ask them any question. You can pre-frame a question. You can use questioning in such innovative and creative ways. And it really stuck with me. And there are some, as we start to think about the types of questions we ask, we tend to default to things that we ask very regularly. But actually, you can ask somebody any question. You can pre-frame any question. So you can start to say, you know, if in a year from now you'd had your best year ever, you'd performed at the highest level, you were so proud of what you've achieved in the business, what has to have happened? So you can literally you can frame any question. You can kind of almost create what they call a presupposition, a command in a question that gets someone to think differently and then make it a question. And I've found they're really powerful, actually, if you can get into this questioning structure and start to fine tune and constantly improve your questions. It makes such a difference to your performance as a leader in a business. Okay, hopefully that's useful for you. Hopefully you still managed to get what you needed from this session without the slides. Apologies about that, but I will send you them after today. And I'm going to give you the chance now just to have a conversation with other people in our rooms today. So we'll have couple of rooms, a 4 and a 3, and just an opportunity just to talk to your peers, talk about, you know, your experience so far, what you think of this morning's sessions, what's occurred to you as a result of this morning's session, what changes you might need to make, and then we'll regroup. And I will ask, if you're okay, I'll ask someone from each group just to share back the themes and the headlines from your discussion, because that's really useful. We'll learn things from what you want to take away from today as well. So I'm going to give you, normally these sessions, they're perhaps not long enough. So I'm going to give you 15 minutes in your breakout rooms, because that'll give you plenty of time for discussion, give everyone a chance to really talk about their situation. And then we'll regroup at 20 to the hour. We'll do 10 minutes of feedback. And then I've got a couple of things that I'll share with you, and then we'll close by 5:02. Is that okay? Sound right? Good. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. I look forward to seeing you back here in 15 minutes. See you shortly. Again. So I hope they were useful discussions for you. I'd love to hear your feedback. So we had a couple of groups. In group one was Aisha, Chris, Leanne, and Nadeem. I don't know if one of you took notes or would be happy to share some feedback.
Go on, Nadeem, you're the man.
I think no. Thank you, Chris. We had a very interesting conversation, and we looked at well, various points came out in terms of I quite liked. If you don't mind me mentioning you, Chris, I think Chris came out with some very good points on, and one was in particular was understanding what his weakness was, which I think was great, because a lot of individuals will not ever acknowledge their weakness, and until you acknowledge a weakness, only then can you do something about it.
Yeah.
And it was putting across certain messages. I quite like the fact that he has split his conversations with his teams from sort of like the weekly meetings into having one-to-one discussions with others just to understand their points. He goes into some meetings with no agenda, which again is putting himself across as to say, how can I help you? You know, he's putting his team kind of at the focal point. So I guess that allows them to open up, and he probably gets results from that. Because, you know, one of the other points, we've all been in meetings where either management or whoever's conducting the meeting does have an agenda, but it's just their agenda.
Yeah.
And they put it across, and you know, you may have a talented team, but who may have now all of a sudden a negative mindset because this agenda is just focusing on one particular objective without actually understanding what the team's objectives are also, or what challenges they're experiencing. And therefore they stay quiet and probably end up having a negative mindset. So there was that point. Another point came out as well, that the team relying too much. Also, on the flip side, the team relying on management. So they're coming into the meeting with a negative mindset because management has always done the talking, put across their messages, put across the solutions, which means, to be honest, you're having a 1 hour negative really meeting. To be honest, you could have just put an email out, because the whole aspect of getting your team together is to share best practice. And what works for one person may not work for somebody else, but it may help somebody else. And so within our group, we, you know, I think somebody's going to change the way they speak within the meeting and ask for more solutions and scenarios possibly of how the team would tackle something, as opposed to them providing the solutions.
Yeah, good.
So yeah, so we looked at a few others. Chris, is there anything else as well? Because I know Leanne mentioned some points.
Yeah, it was just, Leanne's point at the very end there, we didn't get enough time to explore it, but it was a really appropriate point about, you know, we often think about this as managing down, you know, how our people, how we work with our people, the good questions and listening skills. But Leanne was talking about actually managing up as well, and how she could use some of the things we were discussing earlier to have a better relationship and better outcomes with her line manager as well. So really important we think about this as a upward and downward motion, and sideways as well, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, really good point, because especially, I don't know if any of you have had this experience. You know, I worked in a really big company, 3M, for 18 years, actually, in different leadership positions. And throughout that time, I learned how important it was to start to manage your boss, especially when you work for someone very difficult. If you don't learn how to handle a really difficult manager, they can make your life hell. And actually, the most effective way to do it is to coach them. Because otherwise they'll just have you tearing around and doing things, you know, left, right, and center. They kind of scramble you without you even realizing it. So you have to learn to coach them almost, you know, when they're giving you tasks, kind of say, well, hold on, can we just talk about where this fits in the bigger scheme of my priorities? So let's just talk about, you know, the other things that I'm working on. Which of those things are we prepared to sacrifice to make this happen? And simple things, simple techniques like that just enable you to take a bit more control back. And you're not actually, all you're doing is asking a question and helping to prioritize, can be really effective. But they're skills we're not often taught how to develop. So we have to learn them for ourselves, or learn them from mentors, or, you know, hopefully sessions like this start to help us think differently about the way that we manage those relationships and situations. Yeah, really important. Thanks, Nadine. Thanks, Chris, and thanks to your group for it sounds like a great conversation as well. Excellent. So room 2 was Andrew, Cassandra, and Gary. What did you discuss together?
Hi, I grabbed some notes for it, but please everybody else jump in and let me know. So there was a brief discussion about listening, that people that are listening to answer what they think, and rather than understand, and not to understand the point that's been made. One of the, I forgot the gentleman's name that was in the group with us, he was awesome. He said something that I've never done, where he said every meeting has a value, and you need to set a personal objective for that meeting. Find information, moving it forward, everything has value, the nuggets of gold. And that was really resonant for me, because I never do this, and I will employ it. And I think that I've just become really, really jaded over the years with the number of meetings that should have been an email.
Yeah.
And the number of meetings I've sat in where you just get directional groupthink, and the company's, oh, we've always done it like that. And then you finish the meeting and everybody's like, well, I wonder why that didn't work. It's like, well, especially in my area, it's obvious why it didn't work, and you should have seen it in advance, but you didn't, and I just get frustrated. So that was really cool, and it's something I'm going to do. The advantage of an active interruption. Again, I think it was Gary said that he read a paper that said that people that actively interrupt have a higher win rate than those that just purely listen. So it becomes an active conversation over a piece-by-piece interaction, and it's called the jolt effect. So I'm going to look up that. So the action is confirm and clarify, and it helps denounce the misinterpretation challenge as well, that people hear what they want to hear rather than what's been said, which is a group challenge as well.
Yeah, really good discussion. That I love those 3 points. Very good. Yeah, very good. Especially the active interruption and the going into a meeting with your own personal objective, regardless of what that meeting objective is. Having your own personal objective for the meeting. Yeah, very good. Very good. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Gary. Cassandra, anything from you as part of that discussion? Anything you wanted to add?
I think it's been covered. One of the things we talked about is if you are listening for people to ask you questions, and so you picked up on your kind of the amount of information that was synthesized, which is sometimes you have to listen so hard because they ramble, and then you're just standing going, what are you actually asking me?
Yeah.
But actually, some of those listening skills to play back and say, this is what I heard, can really help.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely right. Sometimes our job through the listening process is to interpret and be able to summarize, because that person perhaps isn't in the right frame of mind to be able to do that for themselves. But it can be really helpful just to listen, clarify, summarize. Yeah. And again, it takes a bit of practice, because sometimes we'll be listening to people and thinking, God, they get there all over the place. And actually our ability to be able to translate that for people can be really impactful as a leader. And almost then, you know, the thing I really like to consider as part of this is, if you find yourself doing that on a regular basis, if you've got someone that's coming in and kind of offloading, and you're listening, and then you're going, right, so actually is the crux of it this and this, and they go, yeah, to be able to say to them, okay, it's great that we're having these conversations. In future, if you can start to give yourself 5 minutes before you come and see me, and just start to think about what are the key points that are really most important for us to discuss. So you can do this, they can start to do the processing before, so you don't find yourself continuously having to kind of unscramble your team's thoughts and thinking and conversations. So it takes a little bit of coaching over time, but again, these things all help people to get greater clarity. When they can do it for themselves, they start to take more responsibility, not just for that, but for other things in the business as well. So we start to set the tone as leaders about what's expected and what can really help our teams. Thanks, Cassandra. Thank you, everybody. Really good discussions this morning. Very useful. Thank you. And real value coming out of your interaction. So thanks so much for sharing those as well, everybody who's done that. I've got a final couple of slides that, if you don't mind, I will actually share this time, if I can find the screen. Hold on a sec. First one is, let's just share. You should be able to see that this time. So when just think about, we come into sessions like this. It's a Friday morning. Hopefully we've got good energy this morning because we're almost at the weekend, and we've had some good conversations. Just think about time to actually implement what we talked about this morning, and if you've got 3 or 4 key takeaways, and hopefully has everyone got at least a couple of takeaways this morning that they can use?
Yes.
Great, excellent. Just think about how you'll now embed those, because we're enthusiastic in this session. We go away and stuff starts to take over, and before you know it, we've just kind of forgotten what we'd intended to do. So I'd love to invite you just to think about what do you need to do to make a commitment to yourself to make this happen. And it might be a reminder on Monday morning before you start. It might be you've got a meeting coming up next week. You just need to give yourself 15 minutes before that meeting to get a bit more prepared. Whatever it is for you, just put some action in your diary so it becomes real in terms of improvement. And then final thing for me is just to say, if anybody on the call if you've enjoyed today's session, you think we've got some great value, if you'd like a one-to-one, a lot of what I do is about helping people to think about strategy, think about navigating some of the more difficult situations that they're in. If you'd like a strategy session or a coaching session, do feel free to contact me. I've got this link. Hold on a sec. I'm just going to put this into the chat. So if anybody, what this link does, in fact, I'm just going to change the link. What this link does is it allows you to get straight into my calendar. So if you would like to book a 45-minute session with me, that's on me. That one doesn't work. Hold on a sec. I'm glad I tested it. Let me just have another look. Should be. Does that one work? Let's have a look. Here we go. Yeah. So that should put you straight. That puts you straight into my calendar. Once it's all loaded, you'll see the available time slots coming up. There we go. So feel free to book. You get 45 minutes. And ideally, what we talk about, really simple, but quite effective, is kind of where are you now? Where would you like to be? Kind of in the future. What actions and development will get you there? And then if there's something we could do together, great. But if not, sometimes that's enough just to set you off in the right direction. So do feel free, if you'd like to schedule a strategy session, feel free to do that with me. And if you'd like to know any more about the work that we do beyond just these sessions on a weekly basis, then do feel free to contact me. I'd love to share more information about the leadership development programs we run, the work we do with clients and customers as well, if you think that might be useful. But otherwise, next week's session, so I'm out Wednesday, Thursday, Friday next week with clients. So next week's session is actually going to be Thursday evening, 6:30 till 7:30, just so it's a bit of a mix up. We're going to change up the time. So if you'd like to join us next week, I'll send out details after today anyway. But if you'd like to join us next week, we'll be in the evening. Just remains for me to say thanks so much for staying on, everybody. Thank you for joining me and for your active participation as always. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend when you get there, and hopefully see you all, if not next week, sometime in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
pleasure. Great to see you, everybody. Thanks so much. Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you. Bye.